We're going to keep this very participatory tonight. So Ruth and I are going to talk for a bit. We're going to get audience questions. This is one of those evenings where we have more people on Zoom than in person. So all those in Zoom, on Zoom, in the Zoom world, thank you for being in the Matrix and for participating tonight. You're welcome here and looking forward to involving you in the conversation. And thank you, Ruth, so much. Quick straw poll, how many folks here have lived on Valencia at one point or another? On Valencia or participated? Well, who lived, anyone live on Valencia? Okay, yeah. And how many people were, let's just, I might say some things that are, how many people were in the scene, the lesbian scene on Valencia? Raise your hand. A lot of hands up. Amazing. How many folks had some rough nights at Amelia's? Yeah? Okay. Amazing. How many people purchased books from Old Wives' Tale? All right. Okay. We're going to share some stories tonight. And I'm probably going to stop at a couple points and ask if there's a story that you want to tell or a memory you want to share with the crowd. Just raise your hand. Don't be shy, and I'll call on you and I'll ask you to do it. Hi, Ruth. Thanks for answering my cold email and just saying yes.
Is this on?
Yeah. It is. Just keep it close.
Hi.
Hi. How you feeling right now?
Nervous?
Yeah. Don't be nervous. Just us. I really appreciate you being willing to answer my questions and take time out of your schedule. You told me earlier that old lesbians don't like to drive at night, and so I don't know if you drove here, but if you did, thank you for braving that and being courageous. What's it like to be back on Valencia right now?
It's weird. It's so different. But there's a lot of stuff a lot of memories on the street. So it's kind of bittersweet sometimes.
What difference strikes you most, immediately? And at least maybe just in your experience here tonight and coming to this event?
A lot more, the sort of nightlife that is here it's very different. I mean, we had Amelia's, which is a lesbian bar. It was at 17th in Sycamore. Yes. And so that was at night, but it wasn't in the street. It wasn't out. And it might be more so because of COVID now, but just seems like the whole street is like filled with all these very young people going out for expensive meals and drinks.
Well, we can get into all that, but I'd like to start with maybe just helping me by painting the picture of painting the picture of the heyday of the lesbian heyday of Valencia. Maybe take me on a walk down Valencia during that period. And I'm sorry, if you don't mind giving folks some context for those who don't know, maybe tell folks a little bit about what your role was on the street, the job that you had, maybe a little bit about who you are.
Yeah. Let me first say that my version of San Francisco starts in 1971. Before that, I was in Indiana and Chicago. And it seemed like a much better idea to be in San Francisco. So in 1971, I visited going to a anti-war demonstration, a huge one, in Golden Gate Park. And I went to that and loved it and thought this is a good place. I also very much wanted to be a lesbian, had no idea how to do that. I made that happen, and over that weekend I made that happen.
You figured it out? You figured it out?
Yeah, figured that out, and very shortly, just a few months later, I moved here in September of 71. So it's my 50th year here.
Mazel tov! Wow!
And so first of all, I just want to give homage to the people before me who created this place, because I was part of a huge migration of queer people coming to San Francisco. And that was because of the work that lots of people had done before I got here. So in terms of lesbian stuff, certainly Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon and the Daughters of Delitas, which formed in 1955. So the city was really going. There was a lot of activity around women's liberation before I got here. So when I came, there were already small groups were formed and there was lots of activity. So I ended up living in what was then the Dubose Triangle, not far, but it's not in Valencia. And I was there for probably the first 4 or 5 years that I was in the city. And in that time, there was a place called the Full Moon, which was a coffee house on 18th Street up from Castro, 2 or 3 blocks. And it had a bookstore and a very tiny bookstore in like a closet. It really was a closet, but it was big enough you could be in it, but you couldn't stand up in it. So people sort of crawled around on the floor.
Wait, actually? No,
No.
was that?
Yeah, it was very low.
Okay, so the full one.
But anyway, it was a coffee house and run by volunteers a lot. But we had performances and poetry readings, all kinds of activities in this really small space, smaller than this space. So anyway, that ended up being a precursor to a couple of women who volunteered there, Carol CJ and Paula Wallace, who decided to start a bookstore. And up until around 1975, Valencia Street was a very kind of rundown street. Most of the stuff were storefront churches, appliance stores, corner grocery stores, auto repair shops. There were several of those on that side of Valencia. And a few like storefronts that were like movement offices or movement spaces of various kinds. Partly because the rent was really cheap.
Movement like LGBT rights movement,
No.
or movement like Martha Graham?
No. Well, for example, the George Jackson Defense Committee
I see.
had an office here. So it was lefty politics,
Got it.
anti-war stuff. There was a anti-fuck the army space that became Modern Times much later. Anyway, that's sort of what the street was. And Carol and Paula decided to do a bookstore and we opened it at 532 Valencia, right over there. And they opened it in 1976. Actually, I also want to pay homage to one other thing that happened here, which happened actually right here. There was something called the Gartland Hotel that was this space and above it. It was very cheap apartments, inexpensive apartments, and very run down. The landlord never did repairs, etc. You know the story. And on December the 12th, someone went in and poured gasoline down the stairs, walked down the stairs and lit a match, and the whole place burned. 12 people died right here. So I always, when I pass this corner, always think about the garden. I remember for years it was boarded up and there were spray painting of things like murderers and you know, a lot of opposition from the community about what had happened to this space because people felt like it was, they voted down for the insurance money. So it's always,
Yeah, no, it's heavy.
yeah. So anyway, the street itself, well, Lifestyles opened up and then shortly around the corner was Rainbow Grocery, and then the Roxy opened. You know, the whole area began to really be happening a lot. Actually, Old Wives' Tales inherited a lot of the furniture from the George Jackson Defense Committee. George Jackson was a prisoner, one of the Soledad brothers. Look it up if you don't know the story. And anyway, they ended up with a lot of their furniture because they were closing down their offices at that moment. Also, the Communist Party had a bookstore just on the street from them. And they also had a big space upstairs, so that it was a space for lectures and conferences, and a lot of people used it. I was at a lot of meetings there.
Where was that, Ruth?
522.
522. Can someone find out what's there now, maybe to us?
Mission Graduates.
Mission Graduates is there.
And then another community organization, lots of nonprofits.
At 522 Valencia. What's on the ground floor?
Rock is there.
Oh. Isn't that 518 Valencia? Oh, it's right next door
Yeah.
upstairs. Okay, so that was communist. Okay, so still a
I
political
think there's
space.
an archive up there too.
Yeah,
Freedom
yes,
Archives
yes.
up there,
Yes.
who are great, by the
That
way.
building, okay, cool.
Anyway, that's what was here, right around here. And then Artemis opened up in 77, which was Artemis Society, and they're on 23rd, corner of 23rd Street in Valencia. They decided to call it the Artemis Society instead of just Artemis Cafe or something, because they didn't want, they wanted to be a woman-only space. That's illegal. So they didn't want like tourists or people who just said, oh, let's go there. So they were hoping people would think it was a private club. So
And it
Artemis
was a-
Society.
And it was a woman-only coffee shop?
It was a restaurant and a cafe. So that went from 77,
Was anyone here, did anyone here go to Artemis? Yeah, oh my God, what was it like inside? Yeah? Do you remember the first time you walked in?
I don't know, yeah, just the tables and the atmosphere and this was the 80s, so the little corner in the back with all the events being advertised and networking and housing wanted and rides, and just felt like we were in a little hub. It was really fun.
Was there a particular event that any of you remember from Artemis that you want to share?
There was a lot of music. Betty Kaplowitz performed there a lot, and sometimes Swig Shift. Some of the performers of the community from that time were often featured there.
Was it open like a lot of hours, or was it kind of always open, or was it you had to kind of find it?
No, it was open regularly. They had
yeah, 7 days a week, until, I'm not sure, certainly until midnight usually, but sometimes beyond that. Sometimes there were parties in the basement afterwards. They were.
I mean, do you want to talk about this parties in the basement, or Nancy's watching in the back, so gotta be careful.
Anyway, that was opened by Sarah Lewins, who was also a founder of the Gay Games, which were originally the Gay Olympic Games, although the Olympic Committee refused to allow us to use the word gay with their name, and they won their court case on that, so we had to change it to the Gay Games. But Sarah Lewinstein is the person who funded Artemis and ran it for years. It closed in 1991, so 77 to 91 were the years of Artemis. And above Artemis, first of all, there was a little space when they first opened. There was a space that was also part of the same building and had the same landlord. And so Jill Lippitt established a feminist legal office there. And she defended Jean Julian, who was a lesbian who was having a custody battle about her kids, and successfully defended Jean for that. Anyway, Jill had her office there and then eventually moved upstairs. And upstairs there were a whole bunch of therapists. There was a lesbian tax person
Was this the Feminist Credit Union? No, was that different?
No, that I think was more connected to the women's building.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then the women's building, of course, opened just half a block from Valencia on 18th Street. Let's see, what else was up there? Also, Redwood Records had their offices above Artemis. And
Redwood Records, was that a lesbian record shop?
no, it was a record company.
I'm just assuming everything you say has something to do with that.
Yes. Was run mostly by Holly Muir at that point, who at that point was a lesbian. Anyway, and so it became a major record company that put out a lot of records and were an important part of the music scene in those years. There was also the West Coast Women's Music Festival had their offices there. Robin Tyler was up there. And Tori Osborne had offices up there. So it was like this amazing group of people in all the office spaces above Artemis. And before Artemis opened, Artemis was an appliance store. I saw a picture from 1973. It was an appliance store. And next door was a women's clinic, women's health clinic. And I talked to somebody who said they remembered bringing a friend there for an abortion. And so that must have been in 1970, like when it was barely legal, if it was. I don't know. Anyway, that was another important space. What else was there? Good Vibrations.
Acento. I want to hear some stories of Acento. I do. Who wants? Go ahead.
I don't have any stories because there was a sign on the wall that said no sexual activity allowed. And wouldn't you know it? All the lesbians obeyed the rules. Unless anyone else has any stories.
Did anyone have sex in Acento? I want to know. There were after hour parties. Okay, so as it was described to me, it was a very classy lesbian bathhouse. It was in a Victorian house, and it was like beautiful, and it was like this like multiple story Victorian on Valencia that was also a lesbian bathhouse. It sounds like heavenly.
Summer, who owned it, lived above it. And so the floors above it were not part of the bathhouse, but the bathhouse they converted into a Japanese style bathhouse. And it was beautiful. They did one big room with a big hot tub, and then you could go out to this little space between the buildings where nobody could see you from the other buildings. So it was a private space, but it was outdoors, so you could see the sky. It was all building around you, but you could see the sky. And they had a cold plunge barrel.
Yeah.
A barrel?
Yeah,
A barrel.
it was really cool. Literally a barrel. They eventually built a little thing with stairs and really cool, but and then a couple of saunas back there, and then a place to just sort of lounge and be in the air. It felt great. And massage rooms,
anyone-
mats to sleep on.
Anyone find love in Acento?
I certainly brought love there.
It was really great. I mean, the stories I hear always have to do with people being amazed at the variety of bodies that were there and the acceptance of our bodies, that you could go there and see bodies that were all sizes and shapes and disabilities, and it was all okay. And I think it changed a lot of people's lives just to be there and have that experience.
Of all the places that I heard existed on Valencia that are no longer here, I think hearing that space is no longer around saddened me the most. Because it did sound like quite an oasis.
It lasted the longest too.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
why
was,
did it close in the end?
closed in 2008, opened in 1980, so 2008. Summer, they raised the rent. Summer couldn't afford it anymore, and she, decided she needed to retire, and so she sold the whole thing, but it did not remain. She didn't sell it as a. They also were insisting that she had to upgrade a bunch of stuff. So
I see.
in terms of code.
Fire
stuff.
state.
Yeah,
Got it.
and she couldn't afford that. It was huge.
Yeah, it was very reasonable price too.
And-
Ruth, can I ask a couple specific questions as we continue through the tour? So what would you say, and also feel free to chime in, was the kind of peak of the lesbian heyday of Valencia Street? Was it the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, somewhere in between?
I mean, I think the time, at least looking at the dates of things, that sort of the second half of the 70s and 80s until things started closing in the mid 80s.
Okay, and was there like a central space that was kind of the center of gravity, or was it kind of spots that dotted the corridor from 16th to 24th?
But something was about it.
I think the women's building,
Yeah,
if anything.
Yeah, probably the women's building. There was a lot of activity going on there. And I think the bookstore, Old Whitetails moved up to 21st Street, 1007, I think it was,
and the craft store.
and there was a craft store, and I understand Pell's online who ran the Women Crafts West.
And I think we're gonna hear from Pell in a bit, so if you're listening, Pell, I'm probably gonna ask if you don't mind, and Ram, to bring Pell up on the screen, probably about 5 minutes or so, 5 or 10.
So I think in a sense, the bookstore, the women's building, the bookstore, Alcento, Artemis, Amelia's, they all were really important. People would, I had many days when we had all of them, so.
And what did you do on Valencia?
In 1981, Modern Times Bookstore moved to Valencia. So Modern Times Bookstore was founded in 1971 on 17th and Sanchez. And I had just moved, it was founded in October, I moved here in September that year. And I remember just sort of walking the neighborhood and seeing these people painting a big sign. They had it laid out on the floor, on the ground outside, and were painting it that said Modern Times Bookstore. So it was a collectively operated bookstore, and it lasted for 45 years.
Honestly, like that is such an accomplishment. Like we just celebrated our 3rd anniversary yesterday, and I'm like, how do people stay in business for so long? I mean, it is such an achievement. So I just when I saw that, I was like, wow, that is amazing. And you worked at Modern Times for how long?
35 years.
35 years. Do people remember meeting Ruth in Modern Times Bookshop?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you do? What was she like? Was she like behind the counter and you just walked in, she was there? What was Ruth, what was the Ruth energy like? I wanna hear from you.
Well, Ruth is a nice person, you can tell that already, right? And she was always a nice person, so she might be arranging books, she might be behind the counter, she did everything. She might be putting up posters about some political event that was gonna be happening. She was doing everything, but she was always a very warm person to encounter.
Thank you. I was also paying the bills. Writing the checks, so I did that a lot.
What was it like from your perspective, working at this lesbian bookshop for 35 years? What were some of the things that you saw and things that you learned?
Well, first of all, Modern Times was not a lesbian bookshop. It was a progressive movement bookstore. And I was the lesbian presence at the bookstore.
I see, thank you.
And we had some other you know, I was not always the only one. But it was a very mixed group of us. We were very good friends with Old Wives' Tales. Actually, we called them before moving to Valencia to really make sure that this was going to be okay. We had found the space, but we wanted to clear it with them because we knew that, you know, having another bookstore almost literally across the street might be an issue. We did do pretty different things in terms of the stuff we carried, although we definitely had a lesbian section. But you know, we had different stock of that. And anyway, they were very nice about it. And so we used to take turns picking up each other's stuff at distributors. And I mean, we did a lot of cooperating with each other. So we were good friends. And for me, it was just another, you know, I was already familiar with the street by the time I got the job at Modern Times, and I got the job just when they moved to Valencia. So it was sort of another place to be on Valencia Street. And for me, it was a need that I had to combine my leftist politics with my lesbianism. So
I wanted to ask, did you feel like there was a clash of cultures at all between kind of when the lesbian spaces started to exist on Valencia? Was, you know, did the community all kind of mesh well together? Were there any issues?
of course there are issues. And one of the things that I had wanted to do for tonight was to invite my friend Ruth Mahaney to come. And Vera was younger than most of us were at the time, but she worked at the auto shops, the repair shops across the street from Artemis and St and from all those places. And she said that she watched us all the time. That she saw all these people going into Artemis and into Old Wives' Tales, and you know, she was fascinated. She knew we were lesbians. She was a young Latina dyke, and she knew she was a lesbian. So she was fascinated, but she felt like this was not her territory, and we were not her people. And she did not feel like that space was accessible to her, really. So I mean, she could have done, even if she was underage, she could have come, because most of the spaces that wasn't an issue, but she never felt like she could do that. So that's one story I know, that it was not, you know, we were in fact coming into a neighborhood that was not seen as ours. There was a lot of struggle around the women's building, and the women's building ended up with a lot of Latinas working there and being part of that building, but it was not always easy or smooth.
Was that not how it began?
I think it mostly, Lee, you're the expert of Lee and Shoshana here on the women's building history. They've written a book about it. Yeah.
Well, the women's building actually started as the San Francisco Women's Centers. So it was more of an organizing project of the early 70s trying to promote organizing. And they had an office down on Brady Street, which is part of that, the end of, it wasn't on Valencia Street. And then they eventually realized they needed a better space than that, and they bought the building over here in the late 70s. And it did involve, there was a lot of conflict because a lot of the original core were white women, and there were a few Latino women involved. And then they bought the building, and running the building, they hired a lot of Latinos, but it was like, what's the dynamic between who's the board and who's the staff? And how do you merge those together into a collective? In the 80s was a lot about sorting that out, and figuring out how to do that and how to run a building. Yeah, as you probably know, there's a lot of not very political minded stuff going on.
Are you looking at me?
Building. Yeah.
Oh, I wish I owned this building. I don't. I'm just renting.
So that between what's the organizing and how do you organize and what's your role in that? Yeah, there was a lot of conflicts over.
Well, that was the irony, right? I mean, the women who were in the women's centers want to, you know, have a diversity. And so they hire the women of color, but then it's like they're running it and the women of color, you know, cleaning the toilets. So it's like you have this like irony here of how do you want to do the right thing, but then you feel like you're reproducing the system. And yet they made this incredible commitment to have 75% of their hires with women of color. And then that created a great rift with their original base, which was, what are you doing?
The commitment to hiring 75% women of color created a rift with the original base.
Right, for such reasons as, they were now just letting, women into the police force, say, and they wanted to meet there. But then you've got women coming from countries where the police are certainly not your friends, and they don't want women police officers meeting there any more than anybody else. So you'll see all these kinds of things came out because of those sorts of conflicts. Who gets to be there now that we have this women's building? Who are the women who get to be a part of it?
I see. Does anyone have a question for these two individuals, given that they wrote a book on the women's building? Go ahead.
What is the book called?
What's the book called?
Mothering the Movement.
Mothering the Movement.
Story of the San Francisco Women's Building.
Okay.
Yeah, check it out, it's online.
And then,
Okay.
is the building still there now?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's where I go to synagogue, actually.
Yeah.
That's where I mission minion praise in the Lord room. That's my synagogue. So it's amazing how, and that's the beautiful thing about physical spaces, is they have lives of their own, and they shapeshift, and they create memories and create and everyone has their own relationship with them. So when I think of the women's building, I think of my synagogue, because that's where
Well,
it is.
If it wasn't for the Sons of Norway, the women's building wouldn't exist because no bank would give women a loan. Women couldn't even get a credit card.
Or the Sons of Norway.
They-
It sounds like a J.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, it was an athletic club.
It was an athletic club. Are they Norwegian?
They were, that's who we bought it
Thank
from.
you, Norway. Okay. I'm seeing you looking at your notes, so I want to give you the opportunity to continue on, but I also want to give Pell the opportunity to tell us about Women's Craft West. So do you want to give, are we ready for Pell? Yeah? Are you ready for that? Yeah. Okay, Bram, if you can bring Pell onto the screens. We have a special guest. Hi.
There's Phil.
No, because then we won't see it on the screen.
All right, Pell.
Phil.
You have to turn the iPhone
There we go.
off. See, then you turn it off.
Of course, I wouldn't have this dumb hat on then. There you go. What? Phil. What about it? Want to talk about Women Crafts West? When did you start Women Crafts West?
Corporation. Can you mute one of them? Oh, no, it's all muted.
Started in 19.
Yeah, great.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you now. Go ahead, Pell.
Restart.
I was working at Old Wives' Tales. And of course, we're selling a lot of books and everything. And I thought it'd be nice to have some artwork in here. Carol CJ said, oh no, we're just into books and da 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 da. And so then I thought, well, okay. So when the space next door came available, I checked it out and rented it. And that's how it started. And it ended up with over 700 women from all over the world having their artwork in there. It was wonderful. I really started it because I had heard from people that they had to do housework in order to afford to buy things for their work, supplies and things. And I thought, gosh, I could help with that. And so I thought, well, if I sold for them, then they'd have more things being bought and et cetera, et cetera. So that's how that started. But it was wonderful. I really, really liked it. And then, of course, after 12 years, the landlady doubled the rent. And that doubling started to empty out Valencia Street, so to speak. So it was, I think it was a very nice store, and I think a lot of people loved it. And I remember just stepping outside the door of there or of Artemis and looking up or down the street. And I'd see maybe 6, 8, 10 women from sometimes Germany, sometimes Japan, from different countries. It was just wonderful. It was thrilling.
Can you tell us, Pal, about some of the crafts that you sold there?
Oh,
And that were-
wonderful, wonderful crafts.
Yeah, for
They had a woman, I think her name was Nadine Sky Rivers, if I don't have my names right. And she painted on silk, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful on silk. And there was pottery and jewelry. Oh, we had wonderful jewelers. Jane Iris and just so
Sipe.
many.
Jane Sipe, I think. Too.
Jane Sipe, yes, Jane Sipe was her name.
Is there a particular story or moment that you'd like to tell us about Women Crafts Wests, that we're all listening, you have all of our attention, like we are. Is there a story that comes to mind that you want to make sure we all remember from your time?
Goodness.
Oh, I guess maybe the time of just opening that door for the first time. And there were actually people waiting to get in, and it was a wonderful reception. I think the community really liked it. And of course, we all loved Old Wives' Tales. And so that was really what was happening there. And then of course, we'd shoot across the street to Modern Times, and they'd go to Acento, they'd go to Artemis. And then after all that was over, you could go down the street and go to, I forgot the name of it, and dance. And it was just a wonderful community. It was unbelievable. Then you walk across to the women's building, and that was like a whole meal almost. Everything was there. And walk further down, and then you come to the Castro. So we kind of had it all. We had the boys and the girls.
Anyone here have a question for Pal that they want to ask? Go ahead in the back.
Who are you speaking with that's next to you?
Yeah, who are you next to, Pal? People want to know.
Oh, I'm next to two of the best people in the world.
Pam Bates,
Pam Bates and
Judy Halpin, and Zamaya.
Samaya.
Hi, the whole crew. All right, next question. Any question for Pal?
And now we're up in Northern California.
Yeah, we're in Kenwood.
Kenwood, amazing. Ruth, anything you want to say to Pal?
Just hi, you all. I love all of you, and it's great to see you. Sonoma County, yay.
So, just given the effort, Pal, that you put to be here tonight, I guess I'll just ask one. Oh, is there a question on the Zoom for? I think somebody's popped up. If not, I would just say, Pal, what do you wish we could do to try to keep the fire burning in a way, to keep the flame alive on Valencia or within physical? Or do you wish certain spaces would come back? Do you think there should be a program or something to kind of resuscitate maybe some of these spaces? Or if I could just ask you as a final question, like, is there a call to action that you'd like to give us?
Well, I don't know. I live up in Sebastopol, and it was a couple of years ago, and I discovered this very small place, and I thought, I think I'll open a store. Of course, don't show me an empty store, because I'm going to move something and I'm going to do something with it. And I felt my eyes popping out. So I thought, okay, I'll have something there. And I had it about a month, and the man says to me, I want my space back. I'm going to sell bottled water. I don't think he liked the way I dressed.
I see.
And so there was a man that was selling furniture in the same area. And he took it upon himself to park this enormous truck right in front of my store, the little place I had rented for a month. And I got in this place on the truck, and I was going to move it. In fact, I was thinking of backing it up into his things, but then I thought, no, I'll just move it. But when I did, I dropped something and scratched it. Anyhow, he called the sheriff, blah, blah, blah. They took me to court. I got in court. They treated me like I was the queen of May. And the judge comes out of his chambers with the public defender, and he says in front of everybody, "How old are you, Miss Pell?" Was the judge an ageist or what was good? I don't know. Anyhow, I said, "I'm 81, Your Honor." He says, "Well, you look 61. I don't know what that had to do. One thing had to do with the other, but anyhow, it charged me $30, and that was it. But I still had to get out of the place. The man never did sell bottled water. That was it. He just didn't want me there, unfortunately, because I was only going to be there a short time until I could find a space downtown Sebastopol, maybe take on a partner, and hopefully keep something going even till now. That's what I wanted to see. I'd like to see another women's art store.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's try to make it happen. Thank you for telling us that story, Pell. Can we give a little round of applause to Pell?
Also,
Come down to Valencia whenever you want to, and would love to take you out to lunch. You seem amazing. All right, thank you, Ram. I think we can keep the video. Oh God, no, definitely not. All right, do you want to continue on the tour of Valencia Street?
yeah, I want to talk
What?
about two others.
What do you mean?
It's a place to go.
Okay.
Very.
So Valencia Rose opened in 1981. It was a mortuary at the 700 block of Valencia. It was an old mortuary, and a couple of gay men decided to take it over and, use it. I think they actually lived upstairs for a while. And they used the chapel, which has these amazing camel heads coming out of the wall that are there for when the casket was up there. So those remained, and they did gay comedy nights there. And Marga Gomez.
Wait, it was still a mortuary?
No.
Oh, I missed that. Somehow I missed that. All right.
Oh, so they remodeled it a little bit, but luckily it also had ramps everywhere for pushing caskets around. And so it was one of the most accessible spaces for disabled folks. So it was great for that. It also had huge doorways and, anyway, a lot of comedians and I really think the whole phenomenon of gay comedy really got its start at Valencia Rose. And they closed 5 years later and ended up in the Castro. They opened something called Josie's
Juice joint.
Juice Joint,
Cabaret.
Cabaret and Juice Joint.
Wow, what a combination.
But I know that in the meantime, Esta Noche had actually started right here across the street from here on 16th Street as a gay male Latino bar. And it was one of the first anywhere to be that and really be identified as that. And it became a hangout for gay people of color and lesbians of color. So it became a really important space for people. And Marga, when Valencia Rose closed, moved her comedy stuff over to Esta Noche and was a MC and stuff and created gay comedy at Esta Noche. So it's a very important space.
I remember I went to of all the only place I've actually been to was Esta Noche, and I did when I first moved here in 2010. So I was able to catch a little bit of Esta Noche.
Yeah.
So we talked about Osento, we talked about Artemis Cafe, we talked about Amelia's yet?
No.
Hello. I wish I could have gone to Amelia's. It sounded like fun.
Opened in 1978. So you can see the late 70s, there's things opening up everywhere, all kinds of stuff. It is still a bar. It had 2 floors. It had an upstairs, which is had a bar upstairs and a big dance floor. And so that it had, having those separate spaces, downstairs had a pool table that was used a lot. And I think also some dancing downstairs sometimes.
FYI, this is the Valencia Room / the Elbow Room. So the Elbow Room / Valencia Room was a lesbian bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, seriously.
That's so awesome.
It closed, I think, in 91, so 78 to 91.
Okay, we talked about the feminist credit union, there's the women's building, Sports Palace. I heard that was a thing. It was a women's gym.
Does anyone know?
Okay,
There was a women's gym, I think, up on Market Street.
okay.
I knew the Sports Palace, and I would not say it was a women's gym.
Okay, I was
Very
scratching.
old school male San Francisco.
Oh, incorrect.
Yeah.
Old Wives' Tale, what was the Women's Street Fair? I saw a poster for it on Valencia.
I think it was, they closed the street and had, there were various tables of all kinds of stuff and music and dancing in the street and that kind of stuff.
And when
I
was
don't know. And
We talked-
Street fairs were really big in the 80s and 90s.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
street fairs everywhere.
Yeah.
Loved it. We talked about Women Crafts West, thanks to Bell. Red Dora's Bearded Lady Cafe.
So the things that appeared in the 90s, there was like a whole different, a lot of stuff closed along Valencia Street in the late 80s.
Okay,
Amelia's and Artemis closed in 91.
and what was causing, that's kind of where I want to end, and then I'll just open audience questions. What happened?
Rents.
Rents?
Mostly the,
Lesbians don't have money.
yeah,
Hey.
but yeah, and for the bars, I mean, a lot of people were getting clean and sober. There was a huge clean and sober movement, meetings, lots of meetings all over the city. It was one of those things that I think was really invisible to people unless you were in it, but thousands of people went to meetings every night.
And that really started happening in the late 80s, early 90s? What was that about? Is that when AA
Well,
started?
AIDS was
Yeah.
happening
And then
too,
AIDS happened.
and that really affected everybody in the community.
So I think those 2 things and then the rents went up. I mean, Modern Times didn't move until 2011, but they probably should have gotten out of there earlier. Because they were raising rents by, Modern Times was paying $6,000 a month. And when we finally had to leave, and they wanted 10,000 plus
Wow.
a month. So those kinds of raises people couldn't do. So it's my understanding that was a Centos problem. And also people got tired. The original owners were tired, or the original founders, and it's really difficult to pass on something to a new group of people and, find someone who can take it and do it.
And I guess I just want to ask, go ahead.
I lived on the same block as the Bearded Lady, and one of the women associated with it had a small beard.
Oh, great, amazing. Did you have something you wanted to say? No, I thought I saw a raised hand.
The Bearded Lady incidentally was as I understand it, a site that was a very, very small cafe. But it really was a welcoming and important hangout for a lot of trans folks. And so it became a real center for
And
those
also,
folks.
it's kind of like a little art gallery too.
I heard that's where Michelle T did Sister Spit, was
Right.
Adam Bearded Lady.
Right.
Cool. I guess I mean, I think we can all probably assume what the answer to this is, but I have to ask you and maybe ask everyone in the audience. I mean, the Castro was able to continue on occupying spaces for, I guess, mainly the gay male community to this day, not without its issues, obviously. But it has kept its you know, its existence, its spirit as a queer / gay area, but a lot of the spaces that we've talked about on Valencia are gone. And so I guess I want to ask you why you think that is.
Yeah,
Well, it wasn't
I'm-
just the commercial rents, it was also the rents for people, so a lot of the lesbians moved to the East Bay.
Yeah, a lot of the people who used to be on Valencia Street had to leave the city. But also, I mean, I wanna remind us all that even in the Castro, a lot of people were priced out. And so who is in the Castro now are the people that could remain, and even Harvey Milk had to move out. I always thought it was an interesting thing. Harvey, I remember a group of lesbians went storming into Harvey Milk's camera store because he had started a campaign and he was distributing these buttons that said "Buy Gay." In other words, shop at gay establishments, you know, give your money to gay people, gay business people instead of straight ones. And so a bunch of dykes went storming into Harvey's camera store and started screaming at him about how gay capitalism wasn't any better than straight capitalism. And then I just always.
Love that.
Just how ironic then that the whole area really priced him out and he couldn't be there anymore either and had to leave Castro Street. So, you know, because the rents went up so high. And I remember watching businesses close on Castro Street. I was living in Castro Street then. And, a lot of businesses closed because they couldn't afford it. And some of them were straight businesses, but they were people that had been really good. I remember a liquor store that had given credit to gay people a lot and a lot of poor people. And he was really a sweet guy and had been, you know, very supportive of the community. He had not been one of those who'd been hostile to the gay crowd moving in. And he was forced to close, and I remember how sad it was. So I think it did hit the Castro, but somehow the Castro kept, you know, other people were able to afford it.
Okay, I have more questions, but I want to stop here and give the audience more opportunity to just ask any questions of Ruth or any questions for the audience, or to share a story of your own. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Manny, for doing this, and thank you, Lisa, for always bringing in a good crowd. She's gonna kill me for this, but my daughter is 15, and I'm sure she's the youngest person here. I'm just glad that she's like, Mom. I'm just glad to be raising her in a city where I can come to something like this and hear the history of the city I'm really proud of. And I love that all these people have been speaking up. I grew up in the punk rock era where we used to go to the Lex, and I love that. But I want to hear from all of you. What's your guidance and message for the new generation?
I think it's a fabulous question. Yeah.
We don't even have a bar anymore.
Right.
Let's make new bars. So my 15-year-old needs to open a bar.
So I guess you're asking kind of some of the other folks in this room who have blazed this trail and have shared their stories, if they have advice for your daughter.
Yeah, because they all had it hard. I mean, you all were coming up when it was really difficult. I mean, my daughter and her twin sister can be part of an LGBT group at their school, and that's super cool, and everybody's great with it. I don't think they understand how hard it was for all of you. So, you know, what are your tips now? It's easier for them. So what should they do?
First of all, I'd say I don't think it is that much easier. It's different. But I find I teach LGBT history at City College, and I find a lot of my students don't have a sense of community. They don't have they can't find that group to hang with. A lot of them have problems in high school. Were not accepted in their high schools wherever they're from, even around here, and don't have a real place where they can be, and there aren't spaces where they can go and find that community and meet people like themselves or share that and get to know each other. So I'm not sure it is easier. I think the lack of spaces is really important and a problem. So I would love it if people created spaces, you know, make spaces, make community somehow. I mean, I'm also reminded of another space in Valencia, which was the home of Teddy Matthews, who used to work at Modern Times Bookstore with me, a wonderful gay brother, who died of AIDS. But he had a space just down from where Modern Times was. I think it became a glass company or something that had sold glass for windows. But anyway, before that, it was his space that he shared with several other guys, and it had a huge sort of empty space, and they used it for meetings and for performances and did all kinds of events there in their home, basically. I remember Teddy's bed was like up in a loft and a shelf sort of over there. He draped all sorts of fancy shawls around it to sort of make it a separation from this big warehouse that he was in. But, you know, just having that as another space where we could gather. There was a group called Mainstream Exiles that was a group of queer artists, and they were writers and painters and sculptors, and they did all kinds of stuff and performers. And they met there all the time and then used it as a place they could do programs. So I guess I would say to people, think about how to gather people. I think we're still, you know, I know that computers do a different thing, but I still think it's important for us to gather together. And so find ways you can, you know, make little spaces for people to come together and know each other that way.
All right, let's try to get one or two more questions from the audience, if you don't mind. Maybe someone hasn't spoken yet, go ahead.
As someone who worked in a bookstore for 35 years, what's a book that changed your life in the way that you think?
Great question, everyone hear that? Yeah.
Probably the most important book to me was Our Bodies, Ourselves.
Yeah.
So, don't know it, get it.
All right, go ahead.
Talk about the women's building relationship with the Dover Club.
Women's building in the Dover Club. Dover Club's on
But
25th.
it didn't used to be, it used to be in the building.
Okay, well, there was a bar in the building. What was the relationship like? Oh, we have a resident women's building historian.
I was actually on the board, I was the chair of the board of directors before we went through the conflict with the Dover Club. So it got wrapped up with the fact that we were forced, because of the Loma Prieta earthquake, we had to retrofit. That's a brick unreinforced masonry building. The building is, and when there's earthquakes, you really felt it, even the little ones. So we were under a mandate to do the retrofit. And in order to do the retrofit, the bottom two floors had to be empty. We did it in stages. So we did the downstairs, and everybody downstairs moved upstairs. You couldn't move the bar upstairs. And then we finished the downstairs, everybody upstairs moved down, and we did the upstairs. So it was tied up with that process. On the other hand, from my research, from the day the building was purchased, the vision of not having the Dover Club was held by many a woman.
And what was the Dover Club? Or
The
what is
Dover
it?
Club was an Irish bar, and it was physically in that corner of the building. So it had its own separate entrance. You couldn't walk from there into the rest of the building unless you went to the basement. Crawl spaces. So yes, there was a big conflict around that, and they refused to go. We had to go all the way through.
And they didn't pay their rent.
They didn't pay the rent,
Wait, they,
and eventually tried to evict them. It was just not an easy process. We went through courts. They played a lot of maneuvering games. First, they got all the way up to trial and said, "Oops, you served the papers wrong." We had to start over,
Wait,
do the thing again, and eventually we did get a settlement with the club, with the owners of the Dover Club, but the bartender and the patrons refused to leave.
oh my God.
So they stayed inside and they kind of barricaded themselves.
What?
Organized, never gonna be saved, the Dover Club.
Oh my
Fine.
God.
So it was a big keep on to the bar. And they
Yes.
really, the guy that owned it lived in Sonoma, Napa County somewhere. He wasn't particularly interested in operating the bar. So he went behind the scenes with the judge and us and made a deal. And then eventually the sheriff had to come to finally escort the final barricaders out of there. And then they found a new space after liquor license.
Okay. All right, yeah, I mean, there's the Dover Club.
But you would say it was a very male space, right? in the middle of
Relatively
the
so.
room.
Every now and then from the building, we would finish a meeting or a big event up there and a handful of women would go in and we kind of take it over for a couple hours and drink. But it wasn't, and when we first purchased the building, there was real major opposition to owning that the women, bunch of women bought this building in 1978.
Wow.
And they would yell at people that were going in for events. And there was
My,
a
oh
giant
my.
fight and one
We
died.
should do a whole other event on the sordid history of the Dover Club.
Oh, well, we could, yeah.
You sound like you've got something
I
you,
can comment on the Dover.
were you in the Dover, were you one of those people barricading
No,
themselves?
but I have been in the Dover. But anyway, so they had enlisted powerful allies in San Francisco City government.
Oh, yes.
Legal consultants.
Irish.
Right, Irish. Also, they would have funding efforts for the IRA.
IRA, yes.
Oh my. Okay, let's get one more audience question. We have gone over time, so. Yeah, okay, last question, go ahead.
Sure. I think we tapped into a lot of interesting intersectionalities between the lesbian community and other communities in the area. And one question that was coming to mind is just within some of these lesbian safe spaces that you were mentioning, how included were trans women? What did that interaction look like?
I don't know that much about who was,
I remember there were disputes at Ocento
yeah,
about if you still hadn't had your bottom surgery, you couldn't come into Ocento, and people were on different sides of that.
but if you did have surgery, you could come. I know there were trans women involved in various places that there were sometimes arguments and sometimes not. And sometimes it was fine. So I think it was a mixed story. But I'm not sure it was, I mean, I think for trans folks, it was sometimes very unpleasant. It was a you know, discriminatory situation for some. And I think it's, you know, I think that's why the bearded lady ended up being an important addition to the street.
All right, I'd like to close this evening with a final question to you, Ruth, which is, and actually it's a two-part question. How should we remember Valencia and how should we honor the pioneers who came here and created these spaces within this community?
Well, one person I talked to in preparation for this said that it was really an amazing experience to get to be in this corridor and be able to live your life shopping, reading, going to events, going to bars, bathhouses, all with lesbians, and to just sort of live in this lesbian world, which we were able to do. I'm not sure that that's possible anymore for people, but it was a time that we could in fact do that. I'm grateful for it. It was important for me. And I think for a lot of us, it also, I think, still binds us together in some way when we see each other and know that we were part of this, even if I didn't know you then. It's still something that brings us together. So I would like people to honor that and honor the people that created that. I think there's some good reasons for why we don't have it now and maybe don't need it now in the same way. And that's an accomplishment. So I'm hoping that we all give credit to that history. I guess that's all I can think of. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I can mention a dot, I think they say
Well, why don't we just close for now and say, let's give a big round of applause. Notebook with notes. I'm sure we just scratched the surface. And I want to say, and I think knowing our history is super important. And so kind of in response to your question about your daughter, I think it is very important for my generation to hear these stories and know about what's possible too. Because I think if you ask someone today, like, could you imagine a lesbian bathhouse on Valencia? They would look at you like, what are you talking about? No way, that would never have happened. And in fact, that existed not that long ago. And so I think it's also important for us to know what we can create, and that just because the space isn't here doesn't mean it can't be here. I want to plug, not that long ago, probably 2 to 3 months ago, a queer women-owned coffee shop opened up just a block or two from me called Milk. And I think, all of you should go patronize it if you haven't already and support this new queer coffee space, women-owned, I believe, on Valencia. And so keeping, I think, the fire burning, I don't want to speak for them, but super proud and excited that there are new queer spaces opening up on the street. And I hope many more continue to do it. And if you're thinking about opening up a small business, we have the Office of Small Business, current Office of Small Business Director, run by a lesbian in San Francisco, Regina Dickendreezy, so has been running our Office of Small Business for a very long time and helping a lot of young folks like me open up our own businesses. And so ask for help and create these spaces. Go ahead, sorry.
I just want to say and appreciate this space that we're in. So thank you, Manny, for doing that.
See that my sponsors pitch very well. Believe it or not, Manny's is funded by a community of individuals that pay $36 a month. So it's actually a community-funded, people-funded space, and that's what actually allowed us to survive the pandemic, which is something I'm really, really proud of. That we can exist on Valencia in 2021 with rents, costs, and all that because we have a community of people that allow us to do programming like tonight's. It's $36 a month. You can cancel anytime if you want to. I won't be offended. But if any of you felt like, I want a space like Manny's to exist, and I'm glad that this is happening in San Francisco. Still, you can lift your phone to that square and scan the QR code and become a sponsor. We'll also send an email to you with the link. You can do it in the privacy of your home if you'd like, and I would appreciate it. It would mean a lot if you'd help me keep my dream alive and allow us to keep doing important, necessary, interesting, fascinating programs like tonight. Wow, thank you for all the stories. Thanks for spending time with us this evening. Thank you to the staff, Precious Green, our Director of Programming. Thank you everyone that joined on Zoom. Thank you, Dune and Zoom, and thank you, Pell, for the stories. And events every night, 2 a night now, it's basically for now until the end of time. You can find out more about our events and our programming at welcometomanies.com. The only event I'll plug, and I'll thank the GLBT Historical Society and the LGBT Center both helped us with this event. Next Wednesday, interesting, not related to tonight's program at all, the director of the secretary of the California Natural Resources Board, Wade Crowfoot, is coming to talk about how California is planning on addressing all these forest fires. He's in charge of our forests and all the natural resources in the state. And so I'm not sure why I thought this crowd would be interested in it, but next Wednesday at 6 o'clock, if you're interested in, sorry? Tomorrow, yes. So tomorrow we have this incredible author, journalist, academic named Jelani Cobb, who has written many deeply important pieces, in particular about race in this country, racial politics, Black Lives Matter, and he and the editor of The New Yorker, David Remnick, recently came out with an anthology of writings called The Matter of Black Lives. And he will be here tomorrow night in conversation about the book. He'll be signing the book. Jelani is one of the greatest minds writing about this topic in our country right now. We're deeply honored and lucky that he would be able to come here. He actually spoke at City Arts and Lectures last week at the North, so a very big deal. There's still some tickets for that, and you can get them online at welcometomanies.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great evening. You can exit to the right hand side.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good night.